It's Ellen, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the Ipsos Retail Summit, the race to reshape retail. I know we have about 200 companies attending today, representing retailers and those who partner with retailers, so welcome to all. I'm honored to host you today. And I feel like if I wasn't in my kitchen, I'd feel like I'm anchoring the Ipsos news desk about to announce the latest breaking news, which is sort of true. We are going to share the latest Ipsos information with you and hear industry thought leaders talk about where retail stands right now and where it's likely to head as we work through COVID to help you place your bets on what's coming next. You'll hear from our own Ipsos experts, and they'll be joined in their sessions by major retailers and other top authorities in the retail space. And we have a special keynote speech today from Afdel Aziz that's sure to inspire. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. As Ellen mentioned, we have 6 sessions, and in between we have Afdel's keynote speech. You're welcome to attend all or some based on your level of interest, so let me walk you through what we have. We're going to start with how we choose, examining retail choice and the new omni-channel puzzle. We'll be joined in that session by special guests from T-Mobile, Price Chopper, and Duke University. The next session is called Who is Still Buying? This will be a fireside chat with Tom Sullivan from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Then we'll move to why we buy and a discussion on prioritizing inclusivity in our retail industry with former Nike executive and current head of Elmira Street Associates, Pamela Neferkara. Then our keynote speaker, Afdel Aziz, will continue that conversation with a preview of his new book about how companies unleash the power of purpose. On the next slide, you'll see a continuation of the agenda. So after our keynote, we will regroup, and the next session will be Where We Buy, a panel discussion on the future of physical store real estate with guests from Levi Strauss and JLL. Next is How We Pay, discussing the accelerating evolution of payment methods with experts from Kroger and Moffett-Nathanson. And we will finish with How We Buy, examining how stores can prepare for re-entry with our expert from T-Mobile. We will close by summarizing key takeaways from the day and end by 4 p.m. Eastern Time. The next slide shows a few closing comments before our first session begins. I want to remark on where we stand in retail right now. There have certainly been winners and losers in retail since COVID. We saw gains in e-commerce and essential retail like grocery, big box, and home improvement stores, but non-essential businesses like apparel, beauty, and other specialty retailers are struggling. But regardless of how retailers have fared, good or bad, there is one thing they all have in common, and that is all are working to reshape their businesses. For some, it's about recovery. For others, it's about holding on to gains found during COVID. But in every case, we're looking to change. We are in a transformational mode across the board. Today's sessions were designed to touch on what that change is likely to look like or should look like. And the majority of lessons we think can be categorized into 3 pillars, all of which sort of start with P, people, experience, and purpose. And we think these really are the new imperatives for retail. First, we want to keep immersed with our customers and meet their changing needs and behaviors as they shift and anticipate how they will settle. Experience, optimizing digital and in-store experiences to meet and reward those behaviors. Purpose, standing for something authentic and meaningful that all together combined will create an emotional connection that's hard to break. So we'll listen for ways to win in these 3 Ps throughout the day, and in the closing, I'll recap what we've learned about each. But right now, I want to turn it over to Mark Berry, who heads up our shopper research practice, to introduce the first session on how we choose retail choice and the new omni-channel puzzle. Good morning, Mark.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Welcome to today's first session entitled How We Choose. As Wendy mentioned, my name is Mark Berry, and I head up the Ipsos shopper research practice in the U.S. In the interest of going full screen, I am going to go camera off for a while. I will be back in terms of camera when we get to the panel. As we look at our agenda for this session, Jana and I will begin by very briefly looking at retail industry performance over the last year, taking a deep breath in the process, and also looking at how some of our choices as shoppers have changed. Then Jesse, who is a behavioral scientist in our Ipsos B-Size Center, will discuss some of the foundational changes in the psychology of how we decide. After that, we've arranged a great panel of speakers and we'll have a free-form discussion, which I will moderate, and looking back at how everyone navigated last year, what's happened, what's also happening currently, and how the panel sees the future. We have a great panel. I'll have them introduce themselves in more detail when we get to the panel part of the agenda, but for now we've got Glenn Bradley, who is Group Vice President of Price Chopper Supermarkets on Market 32, Gavin Fitzsimmons, who is a professor of marketing and psychology at Duke University, and Don Dioforio, who is the director of customer relationship insights at T-Mobile. We also have Jesse Itzkowitz, who, as I mentioned, is a behavioral scientist at Ipsos, and Jana Baranek, who is a senior vice president in our user experience group. Again, Jana and I will be co-presenting the first part of today's sessions. One other connection I'd like to make is that Gavin and I co-founded the Duke Ipsos Research Center and think tank several years ago, which is dedicated to advancing our knowledge of the decision theory associated with creating demand generation through the shopping experience. The center has about 10 manufacturer and retail members and largely explores non-conscious behavioral influence through behavioral science principles and experimentation. I'm pleased to say that both Glenn from Price Chopper and Don from T-Mobile are both board members. If you'd like more information on the center and the work that we do, please send us an email. All right, so let's take a look at 2020. At a very high level, it was really a tale of two cities. Retail bankruptcies hit the highest level since 2009, and there was a record 12,200 US store closings, up 22% versus last year. This next graph looks at retail space per capita, and if you compare the US to any other country, you very quickly conclude that the US is overstored and really has been for quite a few years. And for a large part of the industry last year, this overabundance of supply met with suddenly lower demand really caused a lot of displacement. Much of that pain was concentrated among small mall-based retailers, brought on by reductions in demand, higher debt loads, weaker balance sheets, and continued margin pressure. Those who won, though, enjoyed a wave of demand that others didn't, were able to use their weight to get more product when they needed it, and had the ability to execute in a chaotic operational environment. Several also quickly pivoted, doubling down on their e-commerce investments. So when you look at total retail sales in 2020, they were at the highest levels yet, with growth rate really not seen since 2005. E-commerce grew as a percentage more than it had in the last 2 decades at 40%, which represented 21% of the total retail sales. And that was a jump from 15.8% the year before. So this growth obviously represents just absolutely breakthrough advancements in e-commerce adoption, and we'll be talking more about that in our panel discussion. So while many struggled, others attained record earnings, added stores, or consolidated power. If you look at comp sales, traffic, and basket size increases for just the few examples you see here, they are, for the most part, just absolutely stunning increases. I'll turn it over now to Jana, who will discuss how some of our choices as shoppers have changed.
Thanks, Mark. So what are consumers thinking? Right now, they're thinking life will probably get back to normal later this year. And with vaccinations accelerating, we may even see that trajectory speed up. That said, as of mid-February, a majority of Americans feel like it's too risky. Next slide, please. Feel like it's too risky to go out for unnecessary trips. Next. And when they think about going out of the house, people are less excited about going to shopping centers or malls and more interested in going out to eat and enjoying entertainment. Not surprisingly, perhaps, very few miss going to the grocery store, since that's one behavior that most of us have done a lot over the past year. Next. The fact that going out to shop ranks lower for what people have missed may also be related to the fact that most people who have tried it expect to continue shopping online. In fact, across all age groups, people expect to be doing even more shopping online this year than last year. Likewise, the majority of consumers who've tried omni-channel options like home delivery and curbside pickup want to continue using those options. And new customer support approaches like virtual consultation with an expert and live chat are services people think they will continue to use. As a business, it's important to make sure, you can go back, please. Yep, thanks. It's important to make sure those transitions across channels are frictionless. Consumers should feel as good interacting with your company online as they do going into the store, and vice versa. And you need to make sure that includes the tangible elements like selection and checkout, as well as the emotional aspects. Exciting and fun product delivery or product knowledge and expertise, those things that consumers look for when they go in store. Next. And here you can see 38% of consumers are equally likely to shop online as they are in store. They don't have a preference. And 22% actually do prefer online shopping. Consumers want to be able to shift to the channel that works best for them without glitches and at the same level of customer support, selection, and ease of shopping. As this trend continues, it's critical to get the e-commerce experience right. Next slide. And frankly, our data shows there's a lot of room for improvement. So shoppers need to be able to find things on your website and understand the features of products. Consumers want promotions and discounts to be easy to apply. And this carries over into loyalty and rewards programs. Those perks shouldn't fall by the wayside just because they're shopping online. Consumers also want to know if products are in stock and when to expect delivery. The attention to service needs to encompass the entire end-to-end experience so that when they choose to shop with you online, they feel as connected and valued as they do in the store. Mark?
Thanks, Jana. Going forward, retailers are really faced with more consequential decisions than at any time in the past. I think we believe the key areas of focus going forward will be digital acceleration and investment, realigning cost structures, mastering the last mile, advanced analytics, and understanding your customers and their changing habits and the decisions they make. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Jesse, who will be talking about the foundational changes in the psychology of how we decide. Jesse?
Awesome. Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Jana. And as a scientist, I love data, and there's so much here to wade through and think about when it comes to what's changed over the last year. So hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. As Mark said, my name is Jesse Itzkowitz, and I lead our behavioral science practice here in North America. And along with my team of PhD scientists, we really help our clients bring these theoretical insights from academia to life to help them either in insights generation or in their marketing activities. So like Mark, so you can see the screen a little bit better, I'll stop sharing my face until the panel discussion, but thanks again for joining us today. So I think it's helpful if we first ground ourselves in what behavioral science is. At Ipsos, we define behavioral science as a set of tools that can help us better understand and influence the non-conscious, hidden, and contextual factors that drive our decisions. And to do this, we take an interdisciplinary approach. And here are just a few of the academic fields that we typically examine in order to help us in our inquiries. Cognitive psychology, which is my background, is concerned with how people process information. What do we attend to? What makes something memorable? How and how much do we want to search before we make a decision? We also have a number of social psychologists on our team. Here we look at how people's identities affect their decisions, what their relationships are like with other people, what their relationships are like with brands, and how their attitudes and beliefs influence people without their awareness. Most of you are probably familiar with behavioral economics, made popular recently through books like Nudge, Predictably Irrational, and Blink. And here scientists detail the heuristics and biases that drive us to make decisions that deviate from the rational norms that economists hold dear, biases like loss aversion or mental accounting. Finally, and I think a lot of people are surprised by this, we also borrow from cultural anthropology. At the end of the day, we make many of the choices that we do because of what they mean to us and also what they signal to other people. And cultural anthropology gives us a foundation to help us understand not only the historical meaning, but also the trajectory for future meanings as well. But perhaps the bedrock theory of behavioral science when it comes to understanding non-conscious influence is the idea that our decisions are really the combination of two different styles of processing information in our brain. This idea of fast or slow thinking, popularized by Daniel Kahneman, is actually something relatively old. It dates back to Plato when he spoke about our minds being a chariot driven by two horses, one rational and one emotional. Well, science has added a little bit of detail to this ancient story. System one is really shorthand for our automatic, intuitive responses. It's a pattern matching machine, and it's really developed to help offload as much mental work as possible for us to have space to think. But because there's an emphasis on speed and efficiency, we're often unaware of the biases it introduces into our decisions. Now, system two, this is our slow system. This is what we typically think of as our conscious mind. It's deliberate. If you've ever tried to calculate a tip, you can feel it operating, and we can focus on getting the right answer, the most accurate answer, not just the quickest one. And I think what's important about our POV here at Ipsos is that, we really understand that most decisions are a byproduct of both of these systems working together. For example, if I ask you, Emily's dad has 3 daughters, April, May, and system one's there for you saying, it's June, before system two jumps in and says, no, actually, it's Emily. And it's interesting. So, while both of these systems are typically active, there are some changes in which system is prominent. And this is typically a function of our context. And indeed, science has shown that system one, non-conscious influence, is really most prevalent when, we're uncertain, when we're rushed, when we're resource constrained, when we're alone, when we're emotional, when we're thinking about the short term. And I think clearly these are all things we've experienced over the last year, probably to a degree unimaginable at any other time in our life. And it's caused us to think and behave in some really different ways. And so I think the big story for 2020 was really about how these two systems work together to change the way that we evaluate our experiences. While there were certainly many decisions influenced by system one thinking, there were other moments of careful consideration. And these moments of system two thinking in the system one world led to some really interesting effects. So we already know that 2020 was immensely disruptive in so many ways. Our family life, our work life, our finances, our health, our ability to kind of move around and travel. And then if we think about kind of just social action, our communities and even our politics, these have all really been different. And while the combined exhaustion of all of these events together contributed to our overall desire to not think around each of these disruptions, it actually forced a system two moment. Our old habits and learned ways of doing things no longer applied. And this caused something incredibly rare from a psychological perspective. People developed new rewards for old behaviors. Typically, once a behavior becomes established, it continues, even after the rewards have dissipated. The triggers and the cues that are present are enough to force our action. And this changed during 2020. Many of the cues and the triggers that we relied upon were now absent, and we found new rewards to go along with these behaviors. And I think what's most amazing is that this occurred around many of the things that we actually viewed as less enjoyable prior to the pandemic. For example, we saw a boom in the home preparation of out-of-home style meals. And so even with this forced behavior of cooking, it went from something we had to do with something that we actually could do, right? And it's not could the opportunity, but like could in terms of sense of accomplishment. And so in our large ethnographic study, America in Flux, where we tracked 25 people in 5 different states for over 7 months, we saw how the ability to kind of reproduce these out-of-home experiences drove feelings of achievement and of accomplishment and even fun. Cooking became a way for people to exhibit control, choice, and variety during a time when their options were limited. We also saw a large change around shopping behavior. And I think whereas many had reported shopping as an inconvenience or a burden or a chore in the before times, Now it was a place where people could escape their home or escape their family or even just the routines they had. It was a thing that they now got to do in order for them to get that me time we all needed so badly. And as marketers and insights professionals, I think this is a really critical point. If we think about the jobs to be done for our stores, our restaurants, our experiences, and our brands, it's important to ask, is there a new benefit that consumers are now seeking? Does our brand solve this benefit not only better than the brands in our category, but around all of the other ways that that benefit might be sought out? And to what extent, is it possible that our brand has moved from something a little bit more functional to even emotional or social in nature? So while these moments of System 2 thinking allowed us to find new meaning in our established routines, it's also exhausting. And when we're exhausted, we tend to make more System 1 decisions. Indeed, research by our academic partners at Yale showed that when people around the campus library were given a choice between an apple or a chocolate bar, it mattered if they were on the way into the library or on the way out. Those who just studied intensively were much more likely to choose the short-term indulgent option. System 1 won. And we saw this manifest in several different ways during the last year. We saw increased variety seeking, buying products sight unseen, and really exhibiting irrational exuberance with any additional time or money we received. We'll focus on two of those outcomes now, our search for variety and how mental accounting had influenced how and what we buy. And so I already mentioned earlier, 2020 created restrictions for many. I think between financial pressure and stay-at-home orders, people felt trapped. And so some data that we ran over the last couple of weeks in our Ipsos poll showed that about 4 out of 5 people reported feeling limited in what they could do last year. Over half felt trapped, and 2/3 reported feeling stuck in their same routines. While these clearly have emotional consequences in and of itself, there are also deep psychological effects as well. And academic work really helps us understand this link. And so in some published research by Jonathan Levov, a professor of marketing at Stanford University, he found that people actually react against these constraints on their freedom non-consciously, and they do so by seeking variety. We saw this firsthand in our documentation of last year in our America in Flux study. And while there was certainly some variety seeking that was an artifact of product stockouts, hoarding, or supply chain disruptions, we also saw a good amount of voluntary variety seeking. Take the example of Jaron on the left. Jaron was a consultant, and his travel and his business were clearly adversely affected by COVID. And in addition, he had to find ways to school both of his young children, one of whom who had special needs. And we saw him and his family really explore variety through the foods that they consumed. They experimented with lobster nights, new recipes from YouTube, and on one particularly rough week, we actually saw Jaron escape to the grocery store late at night, only to return with 6 different flavors of ice cream. We also saw this with Ilya, another one of our American Flux participants. Having his cookie business crumble due to collapsing demand and trapped in an apartment with his roommates, he explored variety in how he entertained himself, not only with watching things, but with new technology projects and looking for ideas that he can do with anything he could to keep himself busy. Now, both of these categories, food and entertainment, actually share a commonality. They're both emotionally or physically hedonic. They make us feel better or just remove boredom. And because people tend to reach satiation more quickly in these categories, we're more likely to see variety-seeking behavior within them. Another area where we continue to see irrational behavior is with consumers' exuberance with unexpected time or money. We saw this most concretely in the United States with our stimulus checks. And in the case with one of our respondents, Allison, her stimulus check went directly into a shopping spree. And clearly we can hear her saying, everything was shut down for us. When we got the stimulus check and the money flowing in, we figured, why not? Let's go shopping. So we went to Home Depot, we went to Costco and started shopping online. We were really just shopping out of our feelings, and we regret it now. And so dissecting this, we can actually see 2 behavioral biases at play: mental accounting and licensing behavior. First is the idea of mental accounting, a concept developed by Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler. His work found that people keep different mental categories for different expenses or sources of income. Their work money, their mortgage, their car payment, what they pay for schooling, what they owe on their credit cards, and what they want to spend on entertainment. And because windfall payments like the stimulus check don't fit neatly within those categories, it's kind of seen as free income, making it much more likely that consumers will use it for non-essential purchases. Indeed, a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research from last year found that 40% of 2020 stimulus checks were spent on goods and services. We can only imagine how much higher that would have been had businesses been open. We see another psychological factor at play here too, licensing behavior. Simply said, when we do good, we feel like we deserve to do something bad. For me, this is typically why I consume an entire sleeve of Girl Scout cookies on the mornings where I go for my run. I've earned it. And we hear this a little bit in Allison's statement as too. We were shopping our feelings. We deserve these things we were locked down for. And we expect these sorts of windfalls to continue into 2021. As people's stimulus checks hit their accounts this week, how will they spend them? Will there be a greater proportion of money spent on more indulgent and enjoyable products and experiences? How might that continue as employers repay some of the salary cuts they made during 2020 in a lump sum? Similarly, we can expect to see this with windfalls of time too. Many of us took on new responsibilities at home during 2020, taking care and teaching our children, cooking 3 or maybe even more meals per day, and of course, cleaning up after the messes we all leave. And so as many of the services that we use close during 2020 reopen, will we become unburdened from some of these new pressures, creating a windfall of time? And if so, how will we spend it? On things we ought to do or on things we want to do? So as marketers, there's a few things you can do to leverage this. First, try not to lump your category into normal spending. By aligning it as unique, you match people's perceptions of their new income, giving them an easy way to fit into this new mental category. Secondly, provide justification that gives them license to spend. Tell consumers they've earned their spending, that they're justified to enjoy, and maybe even show them that it's socially acceptable to do so. All of these can help encourage licensing behavior, both consciously or non-consciously. Now, what if your brand is really functional in nature and lacks experiential benefits? Here, it's the time and true tradition of highlighting responsibility, duty, and trying to get your consumers to think a little bit more long-term. So these are just 2 of the deep consumer changes we saw during 2020. I'm sure that we're going to discuss a lot more in our panel. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Mark Berry, who will introduce the incredible set of participants that we have today.
Thank you, Jesse. Now it's time for the panel portion. So if I could ask our panel participants to go cameras up, that would be great. And if Jesse, you can stop sharing, that would be even better. Let me just start out by saying thank you so much for participating. We just so greatly appreciate your time and just your wisdom as everybody tries to figure out what's happened in the last year, where we are now, where we're going forward. So we so greatly appreciate that. Let me start with just introductions. If you could briefly introduce yourselves. And Don, let's start with you and go to Glenn, then Gavin, then Jesse. Don?
Hi, I'm Don DeForio. I've been at T-Mobile now for the past 6 years, and I head up their insights for our customer relationships.
Hi, Glenn Bradley. I'm Group Vice President of Marketing for Price Chopper Market 32. If you're not familiar with our company, we're a regional grocer in the Northeast in 6 states, operating out of our home base in Schenectady, New York.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gavin Fitzsimmons. I'm a professor of marketing and psychology at Duke University, and as Mark mentioned a little earlier, co-founder with Mark of the Duke Ipsos Center.
And although I already introduced myself, hi, I'm Jesse Itzkowitz. I lead our behavioral science practice here in North America. Prior to joining Ipsos, I was a former professor of marketing and consumer psychology, and really glad to be with everyone today.
Thank you all. And a couple of thoughts. We spoke before this as a group, and we want to make this as conversational as possible and not really scripted. I'll nudge the group with questions, but anyone on the panel can interject with additional questions or comments at any time, so it's a free-for-all to some degree. And we're planning on probably 2 or 3 minutes of questions at the end from the audience. So please send your questions in the chat box. Wendy will get those, and then we'll ask as many of those as we can toward the end. All right, Don, let me start with you. It's been a heck of a year, and I mentioned it's a tale of 2 cities, so I'm interested in understanding which city that you were in. But beyond that, and more fundamentally, could you just take some time and talk about kind of how this changed about where we live, where we work, where we socialize, how all those things and elements changed so dramatically last year? As your organization faced that, as it started to unfold, can you just pragmatically tell me what it meant to your organization in terms of the challenges you faced and what you put in place?
Yeah, I mean, initially it was a huge challenge. I mean, our business is part sales, getting new customers, and a large part service. And one of the first things we had to do was take care of our employees, which meant in our category, shutting down the stores for a while. And then also everybody who was in call centers who was servicing our customers had to move from those call centers into their homes or rented workspaces we could find. I mean, we were talking about thousands and thousands of displaced people who had to be converted over to a home setup like almost immediately. And on top of that, we all know that this started in March last year, and actually our merger with Sprint closed on April 1st. So it was definitely a challenging environment. I would say what happened was in our category, sales paused, right? People just stayed where they were. And so that part of the business just went on pause. Servicing didn't stop at all and became far more important. And what we realized was we had to be very nimble. Like one thing we had to do as all those people from the call center were being transitioned and some of them were out of commission, we had our retail associates actually step in as call center employees to help bridge that gap for us. And I think we learned pretty quickly that while sales had paused, and so that was okay for keeping the stores closed, people really need their mobile experts. And we had to open the stores earlier than we anticipated due to the need to come in and work side by side with someone to help on your piece of hardware, your phone. So we were going back and forth, I think, really quickly trying to figure out what the market needed. And I think we realized that we were pretty essential. So we opened our stores again and just tried to keep those safe.
And did switching stop, or was it more exacerbated by the pandemic?
It stopped. I mean, people really, that was one thing when you talk about system 1, system 2, our early research, people were telling us, listen, I'm not going to take the risk of coming into the store just to switch. I may want to, but I can pause and wait for that. But where they were willing to take risks that we didn't catch up immediately was coming into the store for help. Because when your phone is not working, it's an emergency. You go into a fear-based kind of set of behaviors. And for that, they wanted to be able to come back into the stores.
Glenn, how about you? All these elements changed all at once, where people live, where they work, how they socialize. How did all those things, challenge your organization as it unfolded?
Well, I think everybody's experienced it for themselves, and certainly the news media covered all of the in-store changes that we're all familiar with now, but we're so foreign, whether it's the plexiglass or the social distancing decals on the floor, one-way aisles and one-way entries and all of those things. And of course, the empty shelves. But, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that all of our in-store teammates really are heroes, because that's where most of the changes were that people noticed. If we did our jobs on the backside, hopefully they didn't notice some of these things that I'll tell you about. We were changing ads constantly, in some cases after the presses had started for a multitude of reasons. In-store signing challenges were significant, and teammate communications, because we had, in our case, 6 governors issuing executive orders, sometimes with only hours notice, and local jurisdictions creating their own rules and changing them constantly, which you need to communicate to the team and to the customers in-store and online. I spent more time working on in-store signage in those first few weeks than I had in the last decade. Of course, we also had changes for which stores were the busiest and when, and what people were buying. Our supply chain is built on predictability of what's coming in and predictability of what customer demand will be, and both of those changed dramatically and very quickly. And as Don mentioned, of course, we had to make these changes while sending all of our main office folks to work from home, including the call center. In short, the first few weeks of COVID were all consuming for all parts of our business. Virtually everything else that is not COVID related stopped just to support the stores and try to adjust.
So it was hang on time. Now, it seems like many in the grocery industry did very, very well. And a tale of two cities. They were in the cities that maybe you wanted to be in. But is there a story, a deeper story behind grocery and the numbers and the performance about what's playing out in the industry, Glenn?
Well, I think there certainly is. There's no question. We're very thankful to be working in the grocery business and in an essential industry throughout compared to other parts of retail. Grocery has by and large done very well. But there are still winners and losers within the grocery industry. And by that, I mean, every grocer that I know of, sales are up and profits are up in the short run. But how they have handled the pandemic will dictate how well they do in the future and how much of that business they're able to hold on to. There's been, of course, a sea change in e-commerce, in people's choices for where and how to shop. That'll last for who knows how long, but certainly will have an impact. How a retailer does in the future.
Okay. Gavin, let me go to you. What are you seeing? You're a great bridge between kind of the commercial world and the academic world. What kind of questions or what kind of thoughts are you getting that bridge the gap? What are people asking you these days?
I get a lot of questions from my students and corporate partners around like what's going to happen. We've been able to observe what has happened, and we've seen Dawn and Glenn and their colleagues make lots of changes to try to adapt over the past year. The big question is how many of those changes are going to with us forever? Is just little thing, but like, is curbside pickup a forever thing for people, or are they going to go back into the store again? All of those little changes. Glenn alluded to it already, but many of us have moved to making purchases online in categories that we might not have done so in the past. Even ordering, a new cellular phone plan online in a way that maybe we wouldn't have done in the past. Are those with us going forward? And I think a lot of it's interesting. It feels like there have been these segments that have evolved over the last year. Some people who are using these new channels because they have to, and it's a necessary evil for them. And then others who are using them because they have to, but realize, wow, this is amazing. And they're not going to go back. And so to Glenn's point also, like those experiences that you've had over the past year are building new connections, new brand relationships, new partnerships that, I've learned that I can go to Market 32 as my go-to place over the last year, and I want to go back. And I'm going to keep going there because I'm closer to them as a result. So these are really many of the questions that I'm getting is how has this forced change been accepted and embraced by the consumer and the shopper and to be with us forever, with even for a little thing like what we're doing right now with all the lists, these types of online things have been in the past. But over the last year, the only way to interact with our clients, our customers,
interesting.
Are going back for releasing.
Glenn, let me throw it back to you. Do you, and we'll keep on the e-commerce theme, are you looking conceptually at e-commerce, at those fulfillment methods as a gateway to loyalty or primary store switching? Is that how you're thinking about e-commerce, or is it different than that?
Yes. Well, we certainly have changed in the last year or plus of what we look at for e-commerce. We know from our research that many people change their store, either their location or their banner that they're shopping, but many also changed their modality. And that caused a whole movement of people trying out new retailers and finding out perhaps that they liked a new retailer and they may never have been in a store and they may never go in the store. So it's certainly a pathway to new customers and a chance to build loyalty. Some people will go back into the store, but some, they may never come to our store and they may be some of our more loyal customers in the future.
Don, how about you? Was it for, there's kind of a sea change in grocery, right? As people kind of change the modality. Was it just more of the same for you, or was it a sea change for you too?
I think I would say it was an experimentation phase for a while, right? Like all these different ways that people normally behaved were closed off to them. And so there was more experimentation with things like video chats, which we've been trying to get launched for a while. But finally, people were adopting that. So we had a ton of learning about how video chats work and can help. We learned that people definitely don't want you to see them. They want to see you, but they definitely don't want to show their face. And we also, I think, learned about, in a new way, the importance of omnichannel and switching between those channels for the final journey to be complete. So our mobile experts in the stores are called that for a reason. I think we were reinforced. Those are an essential worker to our customers to help keep their phone functioning. And also when they have difficulties with payments, to be able to figure out how to, make a payment plan. And there is a lot we want to digitize and simplify to make our experiences faster and easier, but we need to keep that warmth and hand-holding that the mobile expert provides. Like, that was clear to us that that's an essential part of our experience. And so combining those two, I think we changed our focus into, it's not just a digital experience, it's digital and retail together. How do we build those journeys?
It is interesting. I think what you said about omnichannel is just so right. The word omnichannel has been so with us for so long, and it's been so pervasive in our industry vernacular. But I think over the last year, it just became visceral as a concept, right? As this is really what this means. So 50% of shoppers say they're not satisfied with online experiences. That's across durable goods and grocery. Is that because there were problems with transitioning to people working at the home, the call centers? Was it a lack of product availability? Or does the industry just have a huge job to do to make this experience more frictionless? Glenn, what do you think?
Well, there's no question COVID exacerbated the challenges in e-commerce because out of stocks were a significant complaint, whether you were in the store or on e-commerce. And we had an awful lot of people trying e-commerce who have never shopped online before, and grocery may not be the easiest place to start when you've got to build a cart of 40 or 50 items, and maybe you're not used to using a computer or a smartphone. But also, there's just the reality that the bar is very high for e-commerce and for intuitive use. That's caused by Amazon and certainly Apple. The iPhone, you have an expectation of how it should work. Your expectation and my expectation might be similar, but it's probably not the same as my kids or my 80-year-old's mother expectation of how it should work. And as a grocer, and in particular a regional grocer, for us to meet the bar of having it like Amazon, that's a very high bar, and that's part of why you end up with some disappointed customers.
And Glenn, I think it's such an interesting point, and it relates back to what Don was saying as well. I think, first of all, when we consider disruption, if our house burns down, that's not the time to find a new dry cleaner, but I might be very interested in finding a new insurance company, right? And so, where do those disruptions occur? And I think just as though we had disruptions and kind of cessation of services in 2020, as we re-enter, there's also going to be those disruptions as well of what can I do now? How do I go shopping? And how does that look different than what I did in the past? And I think a good point that you're bringing up and that you brought up as well, Don, is that's somewhere, again, where people are going to be evaluating the rewards they get from that experience versus what they might have done in the past. And it's really going to be that second moment of truth for e-commerce, for video consultations, for kind of buy online, pick up in store. All of that, I think, will start to be reassessed again as people kind of start their old routines. So
I love that second moment of truth. I love that. That's all right. We're gonna copyright that one. So Wendy, I'm going to throw it over to you for any kind of questions you have from the audience.
Yes, I do have a couple, and if we don't get to some, we will answer in email. But this is kind of a behavioral science question, so it might apply to everybody. What are we doing right and wrong in retail, such as grocery or big box right now, according to the behavioral science principles you mentioned?
Gavin, I'm happy to start, but would love maybe for you to fill in afterwards. I think stores are doing a lot of things right. I think one of the things that we learned during COVID was around acknowledging the risk that's present in the shopping environment. There was some great research done by Annie Wilson from Harvard University, and it was about actually declining an invitation due to your safety. And what we've been able to do is really see how that applies to retail by saying, like, look, we get it. It might not be as safe as you'd like it to be, but we're trying, right? So I think that was an area where grocery was doing well. I think one of the areas of improvement, Donna, Glenn, it was funny to hear you talk about, you suddenly became a signage expert. The standardization and kind of authoritative way that companies have been able to promote mask wearing, to promote distancing within the store, really created a sense of comfort for a lot. It wasn't a handwritten sign written by the clerk. This is coming down from on top. And I think that was something where companies really did a good job of providing that reassurance that so many of us were looking for, as things were incredibly uncertain in March, April, and May of last year.
And just one thing related to the signage and the communication elements of what retailers have done well. Product scarcity was a big deal, especially early in the pandemic. And some of the principles of dealing with scarcity, one of the worst things you want to do is have people think about the product that they really want. Boy, I'm really going to get a giant multi-pack of Charmin today and get to the shelf and have it be empty. And so one of the just small things that I think retailers did well was, rather than have that anticipation build and then have the letdown be really great, is they communicated early at the entrance to stores, not available today. Lysol wipes, toilet paper, paper towels, and that prevented people from, that diminished the negative reactions when there were unpreventable stockouts for retailers. So I think just a very simple behavioral science principle, but letting people know early on that the product isn't available helps calm the negative reaction.
Wendy, I have one other comment because I know we're at time, is that one of the things retailers aren't doing that well, with only a select few who are, is actually looking at applied behavioral science and integrating the discipline into their merchandising, design, and communication decisions. It's really at its infancy. Retailers need to reach out to behavioral science scientists to say, how do we do this through the lens of science? And I think they'll all be better off. So that would be my 2 cents there. Wendy, back to you.
Great. Thank you, guys. Glenn, Gavin, Don, you were terrific. Wish we had more time for more stories because those were the best.